The cold autumn wind swept through the pine forest south of Mapleton, Pennsylvania, carrying the scent of damp earth and thick fog. On the narrow dirt road named Pine Hollow, 3 boys pedaled their bikes in the fading afternoon light. Only 2 made it home. Ethan Miller, 11 years old, vanished without a trace, leaving his red bicycle lying on its side by the roadside, the wheel still spinning slowly in silence. When the clock struck 8 in the evening, his mother turned on the porch light, its beam sweeping across the empty fog, with only the distant barking of dogs echoing from the far fields. The entire small town plunged into chaos. A lockdown was issued. Police searched every plot of land, every stretch of forest, every house. Yet Ethan seemed to dissolve into thin air. A man driving a blue van was spotted near the scene, then he too vanished like a ghost. The case gradually went cold, the boy's name pushed to the bottom of the missing persons files. But 46 years later, in the dim room of the cold case unit in Harrisburg, a sealed silver hair from 1977 suddenly became the key to unlocking the entire past. Beneath the dust of time, the secret of Ethan Miller had never truly rested, and when it was awakened, the entire state of Pennsylvania would have to confront a truth that had never been spoken. Before diving into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love these journeys to seek forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. On that late September afternoon, the damp chill of early autumn enveloped the town of Mapleton, Pennsylvania. The sun had dipped behind the hills, the remaining light casting onto the narrow dirt road named Pine Hollow, where 3 boys pedaled home after a long day of play. Ethan Miller, 11 years old, in an oversized blue jacket and worn sneakers, lagged behind his 2 friends, his younger brother Michael and the neighbor boy Aaron Thompson. The crunch of tires on dry gravel mingled with the rustle of fallen leaves on the road, small sounds in the fading afternoon. As they rounded the bend, Aaron glanced back and saw Ethan stop by the roadside, talking to a man standing next to a blue van parked right up against the forest. The distance was far, the shadows of the trees stretching long, blurring the stranger's face. Aaron thought maybe Ethan knew him, so he just looked back once and pedaled quickly toward the lights of his own house. 15 minutes later, darkness had fallen. Michael and Aaron made it home, still thinking Ethan was right behind. But dinner passed, the clock struck 7, then 8, and the house remained silent. Mrs. Miller stepped out onto the porch, gazing down the pitch-black road leading into the forest, seeing only thin mist and the hazy glow of streetlights in the humidity. The wind carried the creak from the wooden Pine Hollow Road sign. She called out her son's name loudly, her voice breaking in the emptiness. No response came, only the distant barking of dogs. Worried, she grabbed a flashlight and walked along the road, her shoes caking in mud with each hurried step. Near the bend, the beam caught something glinting, an object. The red bicycle of Ethan lay tilted on the edge of the road, the handlebars dusted with dirt, the wheel still spinning slowly. She called his name again, her heart pounding, eyes scanning the bushes, but saw only weeds swaying in the wind. No signs of struggle, no sounds, just the cold emptiness of a place where someone had just been standing, now gone. She knelt beside the bike, her trembling hand resting on the seat, whispering Ethan, as if the child might hear from somewhere in the darkness. The flashlight wavered, its beam sweeping the dirt road, then flickering out as the battery weakened. She stood, turned, and ran back home. In the small kitchen, she picked up the phone, her fingertips shaking as she dialed each number. When the operator answered, her voice choked, short and hoarse. "My son, he went out to play, and he didn't come back." The wail of patrol car sirens pierced the quiet night of Mapleton. Just 10 minutes after the call from the Miller house, the first 2 officers from the Huntingdon County Sheriff's Department arrived at Pine Hollow Road. Headlights swept across the dew-wet rows of trees, reflecting off the patchy dirt road. Mrs. Miller stood leaning against the railing, clutching her son's jacket tightly, her eyes red from crying. "He just rode his bike a short way," she said, her voice barely a breath. The acting sheriff temporarily cordoned off the area, calling in more manpower from the nearby station. Word of a missing child spread fast. Within half an hour, dozens of locals from the surrounding area gathered at the head of the road, armed with flashlights, jackets, even truck lights. They divided into groups of 3, fanning out toward Raystown Forest and Creek Bridge. The air was thick with the scent of dampness, and kerosene smoke from lanterns, mingled with desperate calls echoing across the hillsides. "Ethan, where are you?" Mrs. Miller's voice blended with the faint echoes in the darkness. A group of officers drove a jeep along the trails, headlights illuminating unusual tracks in the ground. Near the spot where the bicycle was found, they discovered tire marks larger than bike tires, deep treads, even circular patterns, like those from a small truck or van. Beside them were a series of footprints, one small child's size, one adult's, overlapping as if 2 people had walked along the dirt road together. An officer photographed them, marked the scene with wooden stakes, noting possible abduction site. As they examined the bushes closely, there were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric or personal items left behind. Everything was unnaturally tidy, as if someone knew exactly what to do, and did it so quickly no one had time to notice. Night fell, and a light drizzle began, cold wind blowing through the forest making flashlights flicker in the fog. The search team decided to expand the radius to 1 mile around Pine Hollow. Locals skirted the lake shore, trails, and open fields, calling out, banging on metal buckets to create echoes. A boy spotted something strange in a ditch, turned out to be just a plastic bag floating from before, but it still silenced everyone for a few seconds. No one said it aloud, but in their eyes, the fear was growing. At the road's end, police cars flashed red lights, reflecting off Mrs. Miller's face, as she sat huddled on a chair, her gaze fixed blankly on each passing group. By midnight, a second search team was dispatched from the neighboring town. They brought tracking dogs and high-powered spotlights. The dogs sniffed around the bicycle area, then followed a scent for a short distance before turning back. The trail broke at the forest edge, a clear sign that Ethan had been put in a vehicle or removed by other means. Police collected more soil samples, tire tracks, a few mud-stuck grass blades for trace evidence testing. By now, everyone understood this was no ordinary lost child case. Around 1 a.m., the sheriff called a brief meeting right at the scene. Under the vehicle lights, everyone's faces were gaunt. He summarized, no blood, no struggle, van tire marks, 11-year-old boy, gone in about 15 minutes. All possibilities open, but the most logical scenario is abduction. The words hung in silence for a few seconds, then everyone nodded. An urgent plan was drawn up. At dawn, they'd set up checkpoints on all roads out of Mapleton, inspecting every blue or gray van. Police called neighboring stations, alerting the entire Huntingdon County area. Meanwhile, at home, Mr. Miller, the father working the night shift at the paper mill, got the news and raced back immediately. His headlights blazed through the fog, pulling up to the house just as dawn broke. He stepped inside, and saw, on the table, Ethan's blue jacket, soaked from the rain, next to a cold cup of tea. Mrs. Miller sat on a chair, hands clasped tightly around her knees, eyes vacant. No one could speak a word. By 6 a.m., the next morning, as the first sunlight filtered through the treetops, the search team ended their first shift. They'd covered nearly 10 miles around the area, finding no additional traces beyond what had been noted. Officers packed up equipment, sealing the area near the bicycle for the forensics team to photograph the scene in daylight. A young officer looked back down the long desolate road, whispering that he'd never seen a disappearance so clean. No cries, no traces, just the red bicycle still holding the warmth of small hands. In the duty log, police recorded the case's first entry: subject, Ethan Miller, male 11, missing. Possible abduction. As the search team withdrew from Pine Hollow at dawn, the road lay still in the thick gray mist. The sun hadn't risen yet, thin fog blanketing the forest, leaving only a few police cars with faintly flashing lights. By mid-morning, the official force from the Huntingdon County Sheriff's Department arrived, stringing yellow tape to cordon off the scene. The forensics team set up a temporary tent in the middle of the damp dirt road, starting to photograph and document every trace left by the previous night's search. The small truck tire marks stood out in the mud, even serrated tread patterns, pointing toward the main road. Beside them were adult shoe prints and a child's footprints, overlapping. No drag marks, no blood, no scattered items. Everything was suspiciously orderly. Sheriff John Collins stood at the center of the scene, clipboard in hand, eyes surveying the entire area. He ordered a detailed map, half-mile radius, marking the bicycle's position, tire track direction, mud depth. From the evidence, Collins concluded, this wasn't a case of getting lost. The perpetrator moved by van, acted quickly and deliberately. This person likely knew the Mapleton terrain, possibly lived there or passed through frequently. That afternoon, at the small police station in the town center, the first investigative team meeting took place. A photo of Ethan Miller was pinned in the center of the whiteboard, surrounded by maps and scene photos. The forensics technician reported, the tire treads matched a 1975-1977 Ford Econoline van, Firestone tires, 15-inch size, a common commercial van model of the era. Collins ordered a sweep of all blue vans within a 20-mile radius of Mapleton. A list of 36 owners was pulled from Huntingdon County vehicle registration, narrowed to 5 matching the witness description. One caught Collins's eye, Daniel Hartley, 25 years old, mechanic at Mapleton Auto Service, living alone on the outskirts, just 3 miles from the scene. Reviewing archived records, Collins discovered Hartley had been investigated in 1975 for harassing a minor, but released due to lack of evidence. An old note described him as withdrawn, prefers working alone, often stays up late at the shop. Neighbors confirmed he kept to himself, no close acquaintances. Police saw this as their first viable lead. In the late afternoon, 2 officers were sent to Mapleton Auto Service. Hartley was bent over repairing a pickup truck, his overalls oil-stained, face impassive. When asked about the Ford Econoline, he said the van was at home, hadn't driven it anywhere last night. No one to verify. They requested to inspect the vehicle, Firestone tires matching the scene, undercarriage still caked with dry mud. Collins ordered the VIN recorded and photos taken. Hours later, Hartley was invited to the station for questioning. In the interrogation room, he remained calm, voice steady. He recounted going home at 8, eating dinner, watching TV, then bed. No corroboration. When asked about Ethan, he replied curtly that he only knew from the news, never met him. His cold indifference irked Collins. Innocent people rarely stayed so composed. However, no fingerprints or DNA matched at the scene. While the interrogation proceeded, the investigative team searched Hartley's home with an administrative warrant. The small house on the forest edge, peeling wooden walls, cluttered furnishings. They found a folding knife, roll of duct tape, a mud-stained jacket, old newspapers about missing persons cases in other states, all seized for analysis. Preliminary results: mud on the jacket matched Mapleton soil type, but no biological traces. Collins required Hartley to take a polygraph test. When asked, "Did you encounter Ethan that evening?" his physiological responses fluctuated slightly, not enough to conclude deception, but enough for the technician to flag suspicion. By midnight, with no evidence to charge, Collins had to release him. Hartley left the interrogation room, walking down the hallway, glancing back at Collins with an inscrutable look, calm to the point of chilling. Collins stood still, sensing the man knew more than he let on. He noted in his logbook, "Daniel Hartley needs surveillance, lacking physical evidence." The next day, the team continued canvassing hundreds of vans, interviewing owners in the area. No one had an alibi matching the disappearance timeline. Hartley remained the only one ticking all three boxes: vehicle, location and history. Yet the law required proof, not just intuition. Collins decided to put him under covert surveillance, tracking movements, contacts, and routines. On Wednesday afternoon, in the empty office, Collins stared at the photo of Ethan's red bicycle pinned to the caseboard. All traces pointed in one direction, but lacked the final piece. He underlined Hartley's name on the board, adding a short note: "No signs of guilt, just silence." Outside the window, the light rain from the previous night returned, pattering on the tin roof, like a slow countdown to the beginning of a long investigation, still without answers. Early the next morning, when the fog still shrouded the rooftops of the town of Mapleton, 2 police cars quietly pulled up in front of Daniel Hartley's wooden house on the edge of the forest. The search warrant had been signed overnight, based on the matching signs between his van and the tire tracks at the scene. The house stood isolated, accessible only by a narrow dirt road, next to an old tin-roofed garage with a rusted iron door. When the police knocked, Hartley stepped out, wearing an old brown jacket, his hair disheveled, his eyes calm to the point of coldness. "I knew you'd come back," he said, his voice even, then unlocked the door. Inside the garage, the smell of motor oil and metal was pungent. Car repair tools were piled up, electrical wires, bolts, and solvent bottles scattered in disarray. An old wooden table stood against the wall, on it a folding knife with rust streaks, and a jacket stained with dried mud, that Collins had noted from the day before. In the corner against the wall, the blue Ford Econoline sat silently, its exterior covered in a thin layer of dust. The crime scene technicians took photos, sealed the knife and jacket for analysis. Inside the van, they found a few blades of grass, damp soil, and faint shoe prints on the floor. No blood, no signs of struggle. The toolbox still contained rope, a roll of duct tape, and an old blanket. The police took Hartley outside, asking him to recount his schedule on the night of the disappearance. He repeated his old statement: at home from 8 p.m., watching TV, went to bed at 10. When Collins asked if anyone could confirm, he shook his head. "No one. I live alone." His voice was so calm it was unsettling. A note-taking officer jotted down, "Subject shows no emotional reaction." While the forensics team continued searching, Collins walked around the property, observing the fence and the forest behind. Under the ground near the well, he spotted a few fresh digging marks, but when they dug to check, it was just mechanical scrap and old paint cans. Nothing related to Ethan. In the main house, the police found stacks of old newspapers and car magazines, some with articles about child disappearances in neighboring states. They also seized a small notebook, inside which were lists of customers and a few short notes, nothing suspicious. In the afternoon, the evidence was sent to the lab in Harrisburg. Preliminary results: the rust streaks on the knife were iron rust, no human blood. The mud on the jacket matched Mapleton soil type, but contained no biological cells. The shoe prints in the van didn't match the adult shoe size at the scene. They were half a size smaller. Collins frowned, feeling like someone had deliberately erased traces or prepared in advance. He thought Hartley was smart, careful, and might have cleaned the van before the search. In the evening, Hartley was brought back to the station for another interrogation. Under the dim yellow lights, he maintained his calm demeanor, even somewhat challenging. When Collins mentioned the folding knife, he just shrugged. "I use it to cut electrical wires, it's not a crime." When asked about the mud, he said he'd helped a customer pull a stuck car the day before. Each answer was so reasonable, it couldn't be refuted, but it lacked something: emotion, concern, or just a small sign of worry. In the final question, he looked straight at Collins. "You guys have nothing. If I did it, you wouldn't need to guess." By midnight, with no direct evidence found, the police had to release him. Before leaving, Collins ordered 24-hour covert surveillance on Hartley. A patrol car parked 2 blocks from his house, logging all activity. That night, Hartley didn't go out, just kept the lights on until late. When the lights went out, the darkness swallowed the house as if no one had ever lived there. The next day, the news spread throughout Mapleton. Police questioned local mechanic. The local paper published a blurry photo of Hartley leaving the station. Public opinion immediately divided. One group believed he was guilty, saying his silence was a confession. Others thought the police were desperate and clinging to any suspect. At the Central coffee shop, debates raged endlessly. He lives so isolated, there must be something wrong, one said. But what if he's innocent? Do you dare take responsibility if he's wrongly convicted? Another replied. And at the end of Pine Hollow Road, Mrs. Miller still sat by the window, looking down at her son's photo, placed next to the phone. Outside, the autumn wind rose again, carrying the rustle of the forest as a reminder that everything was still hidden somewhere around here. In his notebook, Collins wrote the last line of that day: no evidence, no confession, just silence and suspicion. A week after the official search ended, a few volunteer groups still persisted in combing the forest south of Mapleton, an isolated, dense area 4 miles from where the bicycle was found. On that Saturday afternoon, the sky was overcast, heavy clouds, the wind carrying the cold dampness of autumn. In the group of 3 that day was John Ritter, a road worker who had joined the initial search. As they followed the slope down to the creek, Ritter spotted something green caught on a low branch. He stepped closer, pulled it out. It was a torn piece of fabric, soaked and muddied. He recognized it as part of a children's jacket sleeve. The fabric had faint white stripes running along the side. Ritter called his teammates over, wrapped the item in plastic, then reported to the police. When the investigative team arrived, the area was cordoned off within a 100-meter radius. Under the dim forest light, the forensics team photographed, measured, and marked the position of the fabric relative to the nearest trail. No clear footprints, just a few blurred shoe marks from the soft soil. During the examination, they discovered a short gray hair caught at the cuff. The technician carefully removed it, placed it in a test tube, and sealed it on the spot. The entire piece of fabric was wrapped in a brown paper bag, labeled C77-104A, and sent to the Harrisburg lab. The next day, Mrs. Miller was invited to confirm. Just a glance, and she burst into tears. The rough stitching on the cuff edge, where she had once mended it, matched perfectly. It was Ethan's jacket. For the police, this was the first truly valuable discovery. But the scene was too empty. No blood, no belongings, no signs of struggle. The fabric could have been torn off and drifted here by wind or water. The topographic map showed this spot was near Raystown Creek. If the perpetrator discarded the jacket higher up, the piece could have floated down over time. The search expanded 2 miles around the area, but nothing else was found. At the lab, specialists examined it under a microscope. The gray hair had a root with minimal tissue cells, enough for long-term preservation. But in 1977, DNA technology didn't exist. They could only determine it was hair from an adult male, not a child. The entire evidence was sealed and stored in a glass box at low temperature, a new procedure from the state of Pennsylvania at the time. No one imagined that this carefulness would preserve the most important piece of evidence in the case for decades to come. News of the fabric discovery spread quickly. The local paper ran a small headline: "New evidence in Ethan Miller disappearance." Public opinion erupted again. Many believed it was proof Hartley had left behind after the police withdrew. Others suspected Ritter, the discoverer, because it was too coincidental. Collins said nothing, but in his private report he noted, "Finder, needs monitoring." He recalled that Ritter had also been there the first night, the one who had lifted the red bicycle from the roadside. However, it was all speculation, no concrete evidence. A few days later, the comprehensive report was submitted to the state level. The conclusion stated clearly: jacket confirmed belonging to victim, no signs of struggle, insufficient basis for prosecution or new investigative direction. The case remained classified as a disappearance under suspicious circumstances. Collins admitted to the team, "We need something more, a trace, a witness, anything." But no one found it. Autumn faded into winter, and Pine Hollow grew quiet again. The yellow tape had been removed, leaving only patchy tire marks on the ground, and a few old wooden stakes. In Mapleton, life went on, but when passing that road, residents still glanced over out of habit, as if afraid to miss something that had just flashed by. In the small house, Mrs. Miller still kept her son's photo by the window, where the morning light streamed in, waiting for a day when a familiar knock would come at the door. At the police station, the green fabric piece and gray hair lay still in the storage cabinet. On the cardboard box was a typed label, Ethan Miller Case, 1977. Evidence sealed for review. Collins looked at those words before closing the drawer, unaware that he had just put away the most crucial puzzle piece of a mystery that would haunt Mapleton for the next 40 years. 2 weeks after the jacket piece discovery, the Ethan Miller investigation had nearly stalled. Public interest quieted, leaving only Sheriff Collins and a few detectives clinging to the final notes. Then one evening in early October, the Mapleton police switchboard received an unusual call. A man's hoarse voice, deliberately lowered, "I saw that kid in Philadelphia, near the bus station. He's still alive." Then the caller hung up. The time was logged as 8:43 p.m. Collins was immediately informed. Within an hour, the tip was forwarded to the state police. Ethan's photo was faxed to bus stations, shelters and police precincts in Philadelphia. 2 agents were dispatched to verify, but no one had seen a boy matching the description. One witness said they'd encountered a scared-looking blonde kid a few days earlier, but couldn't confirm. No missing child named Ethan was recorded in the city. The manhunt ended quickly in disappointment. Collins sensed something off about it. He requested a trace on the incoming call. The result stunned the team. The call originated from John Ritter's house, the road worker, who had joined the search team and discovered Ethan's jacket piece. Ritter was immediately summoned. At the police headquarters, Ritter appeared flustered. He insisted he hadn't made that call, suggesting someone might have used his phone while he was out. His voice trembled slightly, his eyes evasive. When asked why no one else had a key to the house, Ritter fell silent. The police noticed dried mud on his hands and took a soil sample to compare with the dirt from the fabric discovery site. The results showed similar soil types, but since the entire South Mapleton area had matching characteristics, it wasn't enough for conviction. News of the call spread through the town. Residents gossiped, maybe Ritter knows something. Many said he'd changed after finding the fabric, more withdrawn, often wandering alone toward the forest even after dark. Collins had him tailed covertly, but detected nothing unusual. Ritter still went to work regularly, had no contact with Hartley, and didn't leave town. One evening, Collins visited him at home. The small house glowed dimly, furnishings in disarray. Ritter greeted his guest with a weary look. When Collins mentioned Ethan, he bowed his head and said softly, "I just wanted to help, but now everyone suspects me." Nothing proved he was lying, but Collins still felt uneasy. He noted in his log, "Ritter notable, insufficient evidence." A few days later, verification results from the state arrived. No trace of Ethan in Philadelphia, no witnesses, no suspicious activity. The call was confirmed as a hoax. The police concluded it was an intentional misdirection, but lacked grounds to charge Ritter due to no proof. Collins directed the team to close this line temporarily and return to reviewing old files. Public opinion began to split. Some still believed Hartley was the kidnapper. Others suspected Ritter. In the local paper, a brief article headlined "Philadelphia Lead is Fake." Mapleton sank back into silence. Ritter stopped joining searches, rarely went out. Some said he sat at the bar at the end of the street, drinking alone and mumbling Ethan's name. Sometimes people saw him standing for long stretches on the forest road, staring intently into the darkness between the trees as if waiting for something. Collins continued surveillance on both Ritter and Hartley, but for weeks, no new developments, no witnesses, no physical evidence, no confessions. Every investigative path hit a dead end. In his report to the state, he wrote "Philadelphia information unverified, suspect likely in area, insufficient basis to reopen active investigation." Superiors ordered the case paused, with only a small team for periodic monitoring. Early November, the search posters on lampposts faded, torn by the wind. Patrol cars withdrew from Pine Hollow, leaving only the empty dirt road and bare-leafed forest entering winter. At home, Mrs. Miller still kept her son's photo on the dining table, occasionally dusting it, then silently gazing out the window. At the station, Collins placed the evidence box labeled C-77-104 on the shelf, eyeing the faded typed words, "Ethan Miller, missing person." He closed the file folder and sighed. The Ethan Miller case was officially moved to Pennsylvania's cold case list. For Mapleton residents, it became just a sad story whispered in the coffee shop. And for Collins, each time he passed Pine Hollow, he still stopped the car, gazing at the barren trees, feeling that deep in that forest something unspoken still lay hidden. The winter of 1977 passed in silence, the Ethan Miller case gradually fading from the headlines. But in mid-February the following year, another disappearance shocked the Mapleton police. Tommy Reynolds, an 8-year-old boy from the town of Lewistown, nearly 70 miles from Mapleton, vanished while biking home. Witnesses reported seeing a blue van parked near the park where Tommy was last spotted. The report reached Sheriff Collins. The vehicle description, a Ford Econoline model, Firestone tires, light blue paint, matched suspiciously with Daniel Hartley's van, the prime suspect in the Ethan case. Collins immediately requested a recheck of the registration records. State data showed the vehicle still registered to Hartley, with no transfer recorded. The next morning, Collins arrived at Mapleton Auto Service garage. Hartley was wiping his hands on an oily rag, his demeanor calm. When questioned, he replied, "I sold it. Some guy paid cash. I don't remember his name. No contract, no paperwork." Collins requested a search of the back lot where the van had once been parked, now just oil stains and a few fresh tire tracks. Police sent the VIN and license plate PL 9347 to the state DMV. A week later, the report revealed the plate had been logged at a suburban Lewistown gas station, exactly 2 days before Tommy's disappearance. The attendant vaguely recalled the driver as a brown-haired man, around 40, soft-spoken, a description that somewhat fit Hartley, but not enough for identification. Collins proposed that the state launch a joint investigation linking the two cases, but the state prosecutor was cautious. No direct witnesses, no physical evidence, no DNA traces. Hartley had a decent alibi too. He claimed to be on night shift that evening, corroborated by 2 co-workers who said they saw him around 9 p.m. Still, Tommy's disappearance was pinpointed at 6 p.m. Plenty of time for Hartley to drive to Lewistown and return before anyone noticed. Police continued hunting for the Econoline. If Hartley was telling the truth about selling it, the buyer had vanished completely. No name, no address, no records. Collins ordered a sweep of junkyards around the county. A report from Mifflin County mentioned a van torched near the Juniata River at the end of February. Upon investigation, the vehicle was just a charred iron frame, VIN ground off, ownership untraceable. The only clue was a metal fragment matching the size of a Ford Econoline door hinge. It couldn't be proven as Hartley's. When questioned again, Hartley just shrugged. "I told you. That van's gone." His eyes were cold, unblinking. Collins noted in his log, "High likelihood he still possesses the vehicle. Insufficient grounds for charges." Early in March, the state issued a decision to separate the two files, noting, "No forensic evidence or witnesses establishing a connection between the cases." Both the Ethan Miller and Tommy Reynolds cases were classified as missing person suspicious circumstances, but investigated separately. News of Tommy's case spread to Mapleton, reigniting the fear. Townsfolk whispered that the guy who took Ethan is back. Many homes locked doors early, kids banned from playing after dusk. At the Central Coffee Shop, Hartley's name resurfaced in half-veiled talk, this time not just suspicion, but outright fear. Collins kept tabs on Hartley discreetly, but he lived reclusively, going to work and straight home, never leaving Mapleton. He also kept an eye on John Ritter, the prank caller, but the man showed no suspicious activity. Both men seemed to be hunkering down in calculated silence. As spring arrived, Collins once more entered the evidence room. Ethan's box remained on the shelf, containing the blue shirt scrap, the gray hair, and now a copy of the Tommy file. He opened the folder, eyeing the faded typed line, Ethan Miller, Pine Hollow Road, 1977. Beside it, a new handwritten note, Tommy Reynolds, Lewistown, 1970. Same vehicle description, owner unidentified. Collins sighed, closed the lid, and added a line to his notebook. Same vehicle type, same pattern, but no evidence. As he left the room, the hallway light glinted off the cold steel wall, and he suddenly realized, the scariest thing in investigating isn't the criminal out there, it's the perfect silence he leaves behind. By 1982, 5 years after Ethan Miller's disappearance, the case was officially closed. The decision was signed during a brief meeting at the Pennsylvania State Police headquarters, where files on hundreds of missing persons were stacked in thick binders, bound with twine. Ethan Miller's name was neatly typed in the corner label, closed, pending new evidence. Nothing new, no witnesses, no usable evidence beyond the shirt scrap and gray hair, 2 tiny details trapped by time and technological limits in a cold storage vault. Sheriff John Collins was the last to sign the handover memo. He watched as the evidence box was loaded onto a truck bound for the Pennsylvania State Police Cold Case Repository in Harrisburg. The vast warehouse, concrete walls, harsh white fluorescent lights, casting over endless metal shelves. Box C-77-104 was slotted onto the 4th rack, amid other unsolved cases. The archivist added a sublabel, Evidence Preserved Review Recommended Every 10 Years. No one knew it would take nearly 40 years for that note to truly matter. After the handover, Collins returned to Mapleton. He stood alone on Pine Hollow Road, where the red bike had been found. The ground was dry, weeds overtaking the roadside, only a weathered wooden sign leaning with faded letters, Slow Children at Play. He knew nothing more could be done. Hartley still lived quietly in town, law-abiding, unmoving. Ritter had quit his job, and left Mapleton a few months later. Everything reverted to false peace, a silence that made people forget this place had once swallowed a child. The Millers couldn't bear the memories. In 1983, they sold their small wooden house on Main Street, and moved to Pittsburgh. Mrs. Miller became a librarian, Mr. Miller a long-haul trucker. They never returned to Mapleton, only occasionally receiving postcards from old neighbors. On her desk, Ethan's framed photo sat beside the small shirt she'd kept, the only remnant of his childhood. In Mapleton, folks gradually stopped mentioning Ethan's name. Those who'd joined the 1977 search had moved away or lost touch. Kids grew up hearing the story as local legend, the boy on Pine Hollow Road. It came up on power outage nights, wind whistling through windows, only a flickering oil lamp. A kid vanished there, never found, they'd say, voices half scared, half curious. As for Collins, he stayed in town a few more years, then transferred to Scranton. He carried only a photocopy of the Ethan file, tucked in a brown envelope. With every move, he kept it in his desk drawer, like an unfinished reminder. No matter how time stretched, he couldn't forget Hartley's blank stare in the final interrogation, or Mrs. Miller's quiet despair upon seeing the blue shirt scrap. In 1982, the state's summary report slotted the Ethan Miller case under unresolved juvenile abduction, insufficient evidence, a dry, cold line ending all investigative efforts. From then on, no budget, no manpower, no reopening without new evidence. Mapleton entered the 80s in its mild, unassuming way, as if no tragedy had ever touched it. Newcomers didn't know, old-timers chose silence. Only Pine Hollow Road remained, leaves changing color each season, swallowing a bit more memory each year. Beneath that soil, the unanswered question lay dormant. Where did Ethan Miller go? On the 4th shelf of the Harrisburg Cold Case Warehouse, evidence box C-77-104 gathered a thin layer of dust. The blue shirt scrap and gray hair rested quietly in sealed paper bags. Outside the box, The typed label faded over the years. Ethan Miller missing 1977. No one touched it for many years. And in that silence, the Ethan Miller case, the boy on the quiet road, faded into a shadow of the past, buried by time, awaiting revival by another generation of investigators. Nearly 40 years after the Ethan Miller file was closed, the storage room at the Pennsylvania State Police Cold Case Warehouse remained as quiet as if time had frozen there. Until a spring morning in 2023, when Lieutenant Karen Price, a veteran investigator with the Pennsylvania State Police Cold Case Unit, stepped onto Aisle 4, home to unsolved child abductions. Price, 42, known for her meticulousness and persistence, was executing Reopen 100, a program reviewing all pre-1990 missing persons files. Spotting the label Ethan Miller missing 1977, she paused longer than usual. The note evidence preserved, DNA review recommended, caught her eye. A child abduction, intact evidence, never DNA tested, reason enough to reopen. In the reactivation report, Price wrote, Case 77 PH 104, victim Ethan Miller, 11 years old. Disappeared September 28, 1977 in Mapleton, Pennsylvania. Evidence: blue nylon jacket scrap, gray hair. The box was sealed with aged nylon tape, Sheriff John Collins' faded signature still visible. Price ordered it unsealed under forensic tech supervision. As the lid popped open, the scent of old paper and dry plastic mingled in the air. Inside, the shirt scrap was carefully wrapped in brown paper, the gray hair in a small glass vial. All perfectly preserved, a rarity for 1970s evidence. Price decided to send the full evidence kit to the State Forensics Lab in Harrisburg for DNA testing with modern tech. The hair sample went to Dr. Laura Beckett's team, head of ancient DNA analysis. Beckett used mitochondrial DNA sequencing, a method extracting genetic data from tiny or degraded samples. After 2 weeks of processing, results flashed on screen. Human male DNA detected. Partial sequence match, not found in CODIS. This meant the hair's owner was male, but his DNA profile had never entered the National Crime Database, CODIS. Though unidentified, Price knew this was the first major break in over 40 years. She had Beckett cross-verify twice, results matched. The DNA was clean enough for expanded matching via new genealogical tech. On May 3, 2023, Price submitted approval for sending the DNA sample to Parabon Nano Labs, a Virginia firm renowned for genetic genealogy, building family trees from DNA data. In her pitch, she wrote, "High likelihood related subject lived or originated in central Pennsylvania area. Request full Y chromosome and autosomal DNA sequencing for male lineage tree." Approval came in 2 days. The sample shipped securely with case code PA77EM. Parabon acknowledged receipt and estimated 6-8 weeks for genetic genealogy mapping. While waiting, Price dove back into the case. She pored over Collins' old reports, typed witness statements, the 4D Connellan tracks, Hartley's vague alibis, Ritter's fake call, all flagged in her digital notes. The more she read, the more Price sensed this wasn't impulsive. There was planning, terrain knowledge, deliberate escape. She jotted in her investigator's log, "If DNA isn't in CODIS, he may never have been caught. But his bloodline is out there somewhere." Mid-June, Beckett reported the DNA successfully archived in the cold case DNA repository. A key safeguard: if Parabon couldn't build a tree, the lab retained the raw genome. That night, Price sat alone in the Harrisburg Cold Case Unit office. Outside, light rain pattered on the window, reflecting dim yellow lights. She reopened the old photo of Ethan Miller, the 11-year-old with blonde hair and a slightly forced smile from the file. Nearly half a century, she thought. If the family's still alive, they wouldn't dare believe someone's still looking. On June 22, an email from Parabon hit her official inbox, Subject line blunt preliminary genetic genealogy results. Case PA77EM. Price took a deep breath, opened it. Inside just a few lines. DNA sample confirmed. Partial male profile successfully uploaded. Family tree construction in progress. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the whiteboard where Ethan Miller, 1977, was rewritten in fresh red marker. Below, she added an arrow and 2 words. Now, after 46 years, the case of the boy on Pine Hollow Road was officially revived. In July 2023, nearly half a century after Ethan Miller's disappearance, Lieutenant Karen Price opened the genetic genealogy report sent by Parabon Nanolabs. The first line made her pause. Male DNA sample belongs to the Hartley lineage, Altoona, Pennsylvania area. The genealogy network displayed on the screen with dozens of names, but only 2 matched the time and location: Daniel Hartley and Thomas Hartley. Daniel, the main suspect in 1977, owner of the green Ford Econoline. Thomas, his blood brother, once a reserve police officer in Altoona, born in 1956. In his personnel file, Thomas left the force in 1979, reason civilian job transfer. These two had never been investigated together. Price immediately realized the gray hair belonged to a man directly related by blood to Daniel, most likely Thomas himself. She reviewed Sheriff Collins' old notes again. A small line caught her attention. An unfamiliar man came to the Hartley garage 2 days after the disappearance, driving the same type of van. Back then, Collins thought it was a customer. Now Price realized that man could have been Thomas, who knew how to fix cars and often visited his brother's garage. The results from Parabon confirmed Y-DNA match, Hartley male line, 99.7% probability. This meant the person who left the hair was definitely from the Hartley male bloodline. Price noted in her report, new hypothesis, blood-related accomplice, Daniel and Thomas Hartley. She requested an investigation under familial DNA match. The state of Pennsylvania approved. A team of 4 was formed under Price's command, divided into 2 groups to surveil the Hartley brothers in Altoona. Initial report: Daniel Hartley, 71 years old, lives alone, former mechanic, no criminal record. Thomas Hartley, 67 years old, resides in Duncansville, retired early, lives with his wife. In police records, Price discovered Thomas had been suspended in 1978 for using patrol vehicle off-duty. This suspicious coincidence made her circle his name in red on the investigation board. The 2 surveillance teams were deployed. Team A tailed Daniel, collecting cigarette butts and a coffee cup discarded outside the garage. Team B surveilled Thomas, gathering household trash from the bin in front of his house. The samples were sent to the Harrisburg Forensics Lab. Results: Daniel's DNA partially matched the hair, confirming male blood relation, but not a full match. This meant Thomas was the one who left the hair at the scene. Price had someone review Thomas's duty logs for September 1977. Archived data showed he took personal leave exactly the week Ethan disappeared. No reason, no documentation. At the same time, Daniel still lived in Mapleton, had means of transportation, and Thomas was a cop, capable of helping his brother avoid suspicion. In the cold case unit meeting, Price presented in front of the projector. 2 old photos appeared, Daniel in 1976, and Thomas's police ID. She connected the 2 names with a red arrow, writing shared Y-DNA. 1 acts, 1 covers. Hypothesis: Daniel carried out the kidnapping. Thomas helped erase traces. Possibly Thomas himself, with his professional experience, had guided his brother on handling evidence and diverting the investigation. The unit commander approved parallel surveillance for 3 months. Tasks: collect confirmatory DNA samples, log movements, legal wiretapping if needed. Price emphasized in the minutes, no direct contact, avoid exposure. While the tech team conducted supplemental analysis, Price continued reading Hartley's 1977 statement again. One sentence made her skin crawl. "If I did it, you wouldn't have to guess." What once sounded like a challenge, now seemed like reverse self-confession, hinting at the confidence of someone who knew he was protected. That late evening, Price sat alone in her office, looking out the window where rain fell quietly on the parking lot. On the desk, the photocopy of Colin's file had yellowed. She placed the two photos of the Hartley brothers side by side, two faces eerily similar, differing only in a few wrinkles. Under the light, they seemed to stare back at her, challenging. She wrote the final line in her investigation log. The boy Ethan didn't disappear randomly. The two Hartley brothers carried that secret for nearly half a century. One acted, one concealed. Now it's time they have nowhere left to hide. That night, Price sent an internal email marked confidential. Operation Twin Silence, Phase 1 active. After 46 years, the Pine Hollow case officially entered a new chapter, when the blood of the perpetrator became the sole witness against him. The parallel surveillance operation on the two Hartley brothers began quietly in August 2023. Lieutenant Karen Price and Team A focused on tailing Daniel Hartley, the old suspect mentioned in the 1977 file. A covert recording device was installed in the area across from his house in suburban Altoona, while Team B handled surveillance on the younger brother Thomas in Duncansville. Each team operated independently, exchanging data via secure channels, avoiding any leaks. In the early days, Daniel lived as reclusively as neighbors described. He worked as a mechanic at a small garage, got home at 5, ate alone every evening, rarely interacting with anyone. But by month's end, the agents noticed an unusual recurring behavior. Every Thursday night, Daniel left home after 10 p.m., carrying a black canvas bag and flashlight, heading toward the western woods, bordering the abandoned land that was once old rail tracks. He went alone, on foot, and only returned near dawn. Infrared cameras captured him digging around the area on at least 2 different nights. When agents approached the site, they found a shallow hole freshly filled with dirt, containing a few charred wood scraps and a rusted paint can. No direct evidence, but the behavior immediately put Price on alert. In her report to the state, she noted possibility subject is searching for or destroying old evidence. Meanwhile, the covert surveillance team collected trash from Daniel's bin for biological analysis. In a bag retrieved on September 4, they found a disposable plastic cup with coffee residue and lipstick marks, along with a half-empty water bottle. The sample was sealed and rushed to the Harrisburg Forensics Lab. Technician Laura Beckett handled it personally, extracting DNA from the saliva on the bottle rim. When the results came back, the room nearly held its breath. The genetic sequence matched 99.98% with the DNA from the gray hair found on Ethan Miller's shirt in 1977. No doubt, the hair's owner was Daniel Hartley. Price read the report 3 times before believing the numbers. She called the forensics chief directly to confirm. Did you cross-check with the original archived sample? Yes, we ran it independently twice. Results identical. This is a near-perfect match. That very night, Price drafted a warrant application to search Daniel Hartley's home, submitting it to Blair County Court. Grounds: DNA test results confirmed direct link between suspect and evidence in the Ethan Miller case, 1977. High risk of evidence destruction. Early the next morning, the warrant was signed and approved. The action plan was executed with care. The 5-person team under Price divided tasks. 2 monitored the perimeter, 2 coordinated with local police for safety, and Price commanded directly. At 6 a.m. on September 8, they raided Daniel's small house on Pinecrest Street. He was brewing coffee, caught so off guard he couldn't react. During the search, police seized a laptop, toolbox, old notebook, and the black canvas bag he often carried into the woods. Inside the bag, a folding knife, old nylon rope coil, and flashlight. Additionally, in the backyard shed, they found a rubber mat stained with brown streaks, and a yellowed child's picture frame without glass. Daniel offered no explanation, just sat silently watching them work, hands clasped. All samples were rushed to Harrisburg. Preliminary results showed the stain on the mat was human blood, but not enough for identification. Price requested further micro-DNA analysis. In the interim report, she wrote sufficient basis to identify primary suspect in Ethan Miller disappearance as Daniel Hartley. Need to assess Thomas Hartley's role. After the search, Daniel was briefly interrogated but maintained his calm demeanor. "You're too late," he said evenly. "If I did it, what would there be left to find?" Price replied, "We have what you left behind, the hair." He gave a faint smile, saying nothing more. That evening, Price sat in the meeting room, looking at the old photo of Ethan and the words "case reopened, DNA match confirmed." A mix of relief and heaviness. She knew this was only half the story. If Daniel was the perpetrator, Thomas Hartley might have helped cover it up, or steer the investigation astray in 1977. His status as a reserve officer at the time made everything even more suspicious. She immediately submitted a request to expand the investigation to the younger brother Thomas, including DNA collection for comparison, and pulling Altoona police internal records from that era. In her report to the commander, she stated clearly, the perpetrator did not act alone. Need to verify the role of the accomplice within the Hartley family. As night fell, Price looked out the cold case unit office window, autumn rain sprinkling on the roof. Nearly half a century, Pine Hollow was still just a misty road, but now, at least, the shadow of the one who once stepped out from the dark woods had a real name. And the other one, his brother, was about to face the light. On the morning of September 9, 2023, the cold case unit team returned to Daniel Hartley's small house in Altoona for a detailed search. Lieutenant Karen Price commanded directly. The sky was gray and foggy, the air heavy with humidity, and the atmosphere in the old house seemed to hold on to something hidden for decades. As the tech team pried up wall panels in the backyard shed, they discovered an old metal box half buried in the dirt. Inside, a rusted folding knife, tightly coiled nylon rope segment, an old paper map, and a few yellowed newspaper clippings. Everything was wrapped in plastic bags, still dry, indicating someone had deliberately preserved it. Price unrolled the map. It was a 1977 Mapleton map, folded many times, edges frayed. In the southern corner, right next to Raystown Creek lettering, a bold red X marked in oil ink. The stroke was shaky, but clearly pinpointing a specific spot. At the same time, the technician quick-tested the brown streak on the nylon rope. Castle-Meyer reaction turned pink, human blood. The rapid test showed typo, matching Ethan Miller's blood type recorded in his 1977 medical file. Price leaned down to examine the old knife, blade worn and aluminum handle scratched, with dried brown streaks in the groove. She said curtly, "Seal it all." The evidence was numbered, knife 01, nylon 02, map 03, newspaper 04. Upon checking the newspaper clippings, Price realized they were all articles about Ethan's disappearance, published in the Daily News in October 1977. But what chilled her, the headlines were trimmed short, leaving only Ethan's photo in the green jacket. Some were carefully folded, edges bearing fingerprint impressions. "He kept them like souvenirs," Beckett whispered. In the desk drawer, they found a small notebook, first page noting, October 1982. Season over. Quiet now. Other pages listed coordinates, strange symbols, and a red ink line. "When the water recedes, remember the bridge spot." Price immediately cross-referenced with the map, discovering the X was right near Raystown Creek Bridge, just over 3 miles from where Ethan disappeared. She dug through Collins' old files. This area in 1977 had never been searched, as the water had risen and roads were blocked then. Price understood immediately, if Daniel had been here, the X could be the burial site for the body, or remaining evidence. She contacted the Blair County Sheriff, requesting a survey team at Raystown Bridge the next morning. While the tech team collected evidence, Daniel was held in the living room. He sat still, hands clasped, eyes cold. "You're looking for something that doesn't exist." Price replied curtly, "We'll know soon enough." That afternoon, preliminary results from Harrisburg arrived. The blood on the nylon rope was human, typo, not matching Daniel. The map and notebook were digitally photographed for further analysis. All evidence was sealed and transported that night. Evening in the office, Price pinned an enlarged map to the whiteboard. The red X sat beside the curve of Raystown Creek, near an old abandoned farm bridge from the 1980s. She noted below, unsearched area, open scene 10/9. The team fell silent. Everyone knew they might be touching what Mapleton had missed for 46 years. Price reviewed what they had: gray hair matching Daniel's DNA, nylon rope stained with Type O blood, hidden map with cryptic markings, and newspapers kept like mementos. The picture emerged: the kidnapper had obsessive and controlling tendencies, retaining victim souvenirs to maintain imagined power. But what puzzled Price was, if Daniel was the sole perpetrator, why mark the location on the map, like guiding someone else to find it? She looked back at Ethan's photo pinned to the board, then to Thomas Hartley's photo, the brother who was once a reserve cop. The two were so alike, they were hard to tell apart. A hypothesis flashed in her mind. Could Thomas have been to Raystown Creek too? Before leaving the office, Price sent an urgent report to the commander. Evidence solidifies hypothesis of Daniel Hartley's direct involvement in Ethan Miller case. 1977, Mapleton map has X mark near Raystown Creek Bridge, unsearched area. Recommend excavation on 10/9 and DNA sample from Thomas Hartley for comparison. As she left the building, the clock neared midnight. She paused at the cold case bulletin board, where 11-year-old Ethan's photo lay among hundreds of others. The yellow light illuminated the boy's face, his faint smile like waiting for an answer. The next morning, Altoona Radio News aired a brief report. Pennsylvania State Police prepare excavation near Raystown Creek Bridge, under new warrant, in 1977 disappearance case. A few miles away, in the quiet house in Duncansville, Thomas Hartley sat in his armchair, radio on low. When he heard Raystown Creek, his hand tightened slightly on the porcelain mug. A drop of coffee fell to the floor. His gaze distant, then a thin, cold smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. The smile of someone who knew the past he'd buried was about to be unearthed with the old waters. On the morning of September 10, 2023, thick fog blanketed the Raystown Creek area, which had been forgotten for 4 decades. The zone around the old bridge was cordoned off. Lieutenant Karen Price and the cold case unit team were on site with the state's forensics group, carrying ground-penetrating radar (GPR) to scan the area marked X on the 1977 Mapleton map found in Daniel Hartley's house. The GPR machine moved slowly along the damp grassy bank. Signals appeared steady until an irregular wave spike showed up at a depth of about 1.2 meters. Beckett, the forensics technician, leaned down to check the screen. "There's something here, small size, compact shape." The team immediately cordoned off the spot, staked markers, and set up a temporary canopy to begin the excavation. The soil was dug up in thin layers. After more than 20 minutes, the shovel blade hit something hard. A technician gently brushed away the mud layer and said, "Bone." Small fragments of bone, pale yellow, soaked in groundwater, gradually emerged. As they dug deeper, they uncovered ribs and a child's arm bone. Then, a soft gasp escaped as the flashlight beam reflected off a small round object. A broken blue button with white stripes, the plastic type like the shirt Ethan wore on the day he vanished. Next to it, in the damp soil, a .22 caliber bullet remained intact. The air went still. Price stood at the edge of the pit, light rain spotting her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the bone fragments. "We've found the boy," she said softly. The whole area fell silent. The remains were collected and rushed to the state forensics lab in Harrisburg. Preliminary report: victim was a male child aged 10, 12, burial time over 40 years. The skull was intact, with a round hole in the right temple, a .22 caliber bullet wound. Beckett recommended DNA testing from the femur bone sample, comparing it to the 1980 sample from Robert Miller, Ethan's biological father, stored in the database. When the results appeared, the line on the screen made the whole room hold its breath. Parent-child match probability, 99.996%. Beckett confirmed, the remains are Ethan Miller's. Price nodded, her eyes meeting Beckett's gaze. They knew that after 46 years the child had finally been found. But relief immediately gave way to suspicion when the bullet was sent for analysis. The ballistics report showed rifling twists, matching the Remington .22 LR registered to Thomas Hartley, Daniel's brother, when he was a reserve cop in Altoona, in 1976. Internal records confirmed Thomas sold the gun in 1981, but the buyer was unknown. This match chilled Price. If this bullet is from that Remington, we're looking at a crime by two people, not just one. In the emergency meeting that same day, Price presented the findings: human bones, jacket, bullet. All pointed to Ethan being shot with Thomas's gun, and Daniel hiding the body. She said, "We have Daniel's DNA at the old scene, and the bullet traced to Thomas. This isn't a solo case anymore." The cold case unit commander nodded. Investigation shifts from lone perpetrator to possible blood-related accomplices. That afternoon, the survey team expanded the area around the bridge. Just a few meters from the first pit, the GPR detected a second anomaly, a hand-sized object. When dug up, they found a deformed, rusted bullet head, matching .22 caliber. 2 bullets, 2 shots, enough to confirm this was no accident. Price requested chemical testing on residue clinging to the soil around the bullet. Analysis revealed traces of Remington barrel oil. She stared at the results, voice low. No doubt, Thomas's gun was used. That night, Price sat in her office, the screen's glow reflecting on her tense face. She reviewed photos of the Hartley brothers, Daniel, the cold mechanic, and Thomas, the ex-cop with a kind face but icy eyes. One pulled the trigger, she thought, and one covered it up. The next morning, an internal bulletin was issued. Case 77 PH 104, homicide confirmed. Suspects, Daniel and Thomas Hartley, familial co-offenders. The summary file stated clearly, Daniel's DNA matched evidence, the bullet matched Thomas's former gun, and the victim's burial site was exactly at the X's on the old map. Price read the report again, then gently closed it. Nearly half a century, she murmured, and the secret stayed in one family's blood. That afternoon, the rain stopped. In Harrisburg, the box containing the remains was sealed and labeled Ethan Miller, 1977, 2023. Meanwhile in Duncansville, Thomas Hartley sat in his living room, the TV on low. When the radio news mentioned discovery of Mapleton boy's remains and linked to local ex-cop's weapon, he quietly turned it off. The coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly, leaving a dark ring on the wooden table. Outside the window, dark clouds hung low, the steady drip of rainwater echoing. On Thomas's wrinkled face, the corner of his mouth curled into a thin smile, the smile of a man who knew the time that had sheltered him for 46 years was running out, and the truth was starting to rise from the depths of Raystown Creek. On the morning of September 15, 2023, the Pennsylvania State Police headquarters buzzed with ringing phones. A report from the Harrisburg Forensics Lab had just confirmed the ballistics results matched the Remington .22 once registered to Thomas Hartley. Lieutenant Karen Price immediately signed an emergency warrant request for the arrest of both brothers, Daniel and Thomas Hartley, on charges of first-degree murder, intentional accomplice conduct. That afternoon, SWAT teams simultaneously raided 2 locations, Daniel's house in Altoona and Thomas's in Duncansville. Daniel was cuffed next to his garage door, where Price had once found the old metal trunk. He didn't resist, just said one cold line, "You're later than I expected." Meanwhile, in Duncansville, Thomas was taken while brewing coffee. He didn't ask why, just stared at the officer, voice raspy. "I guess Daniel lied again." At Thomas's house, the search team found a brown leather notebook, its spine worn, hidden behind a desk drawer. The first page was dated October 2, 1977, in slanted, slightly shaky handwriting. "Gotta teach the kid a lesson, he needs to learn fear." Later pages mixed notes on reserve police shifts with disjointed lines. "No one will find it. Daniel said it was just a scare. One bullet too quick. Both Price and Beckett fell silent reading it. Each line felt like a slash through time. The brothers were taken to separate interrogation rooms. Price requested video recording of both sessions. Interrogation room, A. Daniel Hartley. Dim light, his voice eerily calm. Were you at Raystown Creek in 1977? Yeah. Thomas called me there. He panicked, said it was an accident. Did you know Ethan Miller? The kid hung around the garage. He accused me of stealing stuff. Thomas said he needed a lesson. I got there after it happened. I just helped clean up. Interrogation room B. Thomas Hartley, aged face, sunken eyes, hands trembling slightly. You owned a Remington .22, right? Yes. But I sold it in 1981. I don't know why the bullet matches. Is this notebook yours? Thomas was silent for a few seconds, then said softly, I just wrote to ease my mind. Daniel told me to shoot, said he'd take the blame. The statements overlapped, but didn't align. Daniel said Thomas fired, while Thomas said Daniel was the mastermind. Price sat watching both recordings, feeling like she was hearing two warped memory fragments illuminating each other. The final forensics results from Harrisburg arrived that same day. The two-page report summarized briefly. DNA on the blue jacket, evidence found in 1977, matched Daniel Hartley perfectly. Gunpowder residue and barrel oil traces on the .22 bullet matched Thomas Hartley's Remington gun. No DNA from Thomas on the jacket, but a gray hair from Daniel was stuck to the collar. Price placed the two files side by side, one for Daniel, one for Thomas. One left DNA on the victim's jacket, the other left the bullet in the skull. The two pieces of evidence complemented each other like perfect puzzle pieces of the same crime. When Price entered the interrogation room for the second time, Daniel looked up, eyes sharp as a knife. You know, he said, Thomas was still in his reserve cop uniform back then. He said no one would suspect someone like him. Price pressed, you say that to lighten your sentence. Daniel smiled, no, so you'd know that badge wearers can pull triggers too. In the next room, Thomas nearly broke down. He admitted to following Ethan with his brother, out of curiosity, then his voice cracked. He threatened me, said if I didn't help, he'd tell I abused my position. When Price showed him the DNA results sheet, Thomas just stared at the line Remington .22, match confirmed, and murmured, I didn't think he'd keep that gun so long. The cross-examination dragged on for 2 full days. Each man's statement was cross-checked against the others. Contradictions piled on contradictions. But for Price, what mattered now wasn't who pulled the trigger first, but that both were involved, each holding a piece of the guilt. One caused the death, the other buried it under the earth. In the concluding report sent to the state attorney general's office, Price wrote, the Ethan Miller case is not an individual crime, but a sin shared between the two Hartley brothers. Daniel inflicted the injury and hid the body. Thomas fired the shot and concealed the evidence. They acted together, stayed silent together for 46 years. That afternoon, as Price left the interrogation room, the headquarters hallway was dead quiet. She paused at the cold case board, where Ethan Miller's photo now had a red label added. Case solved, dual offenders. Under the dim fluorescent lights, the 11-year-old boy's face still smiled, as if he'd finally been given justice, though the price was the downfall of a family once seen as a model in Pennsylvania. And in 2 separate cells, Daniel and Thomas sat just a concrete wall apart. Neither spoke, but when the lights went out, both looked up at the ceiling, as if together hearing the flow of Raystown Creek water somewhere in their memories, the sound of a night in 1977, neither would ever forget. On September 19, 2023, the Pennsylvania State Forensics Lab released the final comprehensive report for Case 77-PH-104. Ethan Miller. The file, over 60 pages thick, crystallized 46 years of investigation and 2 months of urgent pursuit. Lieutenant Karen Price received the first copy, stamped in bold red final report, homicide confirmed. The report's opening section confirmed the ballistics conclusion. The .22 caliber bullet found at Raystown Creek matched 100% with the Remington .22 LR that Thomas Hartley had registered in 1976. The twists, grooves, and even metalware were perfectly consistent. The ballistics expert concluded no other gun could produce a similar pattern. Thomas Hartley's Remington was the murder weapon. Next, DNA analysis showed old bloodstains on the nylon rope seized from Daniel Hartley's garage, matched Ethan Miller's genetic profile stored in the state database since 1980. The faint pinhead-sized blood spot was enough to confirm the child had been bound with that very rope before death. Additionally, the gray hair stuck to the victim's collar yielded a DNA match to Daniel Hartley, with a 99.9999% probability. The intact hair follicle proved direct contact, no cross-contamination possible. The analyst noted, the location and condition of the sample indicate the suspect was in close contact with the victim at the time of death. The experts reconstructed the 1977 timeline. Evening of October 2nd, Ethan biked home with his brother and friend. Witness Aaron Thompson reported seeing a blue van pull over, a man step out and talk to Ethan, matching Daniel's description. About an hour later, the boy vanished. Daniel's interrogation statement confirmed, "I just meant to scare him, but things got out of hand." Based on Thomas's journal and the X mark on the found map, the investigation team pieced together the event sequence. Daniel intercepted Ethan at Pine Hollow. Thomas, then a reserve cop, arrived at his brother's call. The two argued. Thomas's Remington .22 went off in his hand, the bullet piercing the right temple. Daniel panicked, bound and transported the body to the Raystown Creek bank. Thomas returned to report his patrol. No irregularities detected. It all aligned with the original 1977 investigation file. Times, locations, and suspect vehicle description matched perfectly. The forensics lab also pointed out, mineral composition in soil clinging to the victim's clothes matched the red dirt type at Daniel's garage, over 100 miles from Mapleton, proving the body was moved at least twice before burial. Mud stains, tree roots, and river sediment fit the early October 1977 low water phase, matching a note in Daniel's journal. "When water recedes, remember bridge spot." Price read to this point, her hand gripping the file cover tightly. Every detail from bullet to hair had formed a complete picture, no room for doubt. She wrote a summary for the state prosecutor's office. Test results and statements prove the Hartley brothers jointly participated in the kidnapping and murder of Ethan Miller. Thomas fired the shot, Daniel bound, transported and hid the body. The conduct was accomplice-based, intentional, sustained by silence for 46 years. That afternoon, the investigation team held its final meeting. The table was laid out with all evidence: the bullet, nylon rope, map, jacket, and a photo of 11-year-old Ethan. No one spoke, just the sound of pen scratching in the room. Beckett said softly, 46 years, and finally we have answers. At 6 p.m., Price placed the sealed envelope containing the original file and evidence into the transfer box. The red stamp read "Transferred to Pennsylvania State Prosecutor's Office." The report included a prosecution recommendation for defendants Daniel Hartley and Thomas Hartley on charges: first-degree murder, kidnapping of a minor, concealment of criminal evidence. On the drive back to Mapleton, Price stopped by Raystown Lake. The water lay flat and still, reflecting the copper sunset. She thought of the lost boy and the two men with the same last name, who'd hidden their guilt for a lifetime. "No secret lasts forever," she whispered. Night fell, and in the cold case headquarters, a new line was added to the board. Case 77-PH-104, status, closed, prosecution initiated. At the same time, in the state prison, Daniel and Thomas sat in facing cells. Daniel peered through the steel door slot, voice hoarse. "See, science knows it all in the end." Thomas didn't reply, just bowed his head, hands clasped tight on his knees. Outside, autumn rain fell softly, like a countdown closing a case that had slumbered nearly half a century, now awakened by undeniable truth. April 2024, nearly half a century after Ethan Miller's disappearance, the Blair County Courthouse opened a trial that drew attention from the entire state of Pennsylvania. Brothers Daniel and Thomas Hartley were indicted on 3 counts: kidnapping of a minor, second-degree murder, and concealment of a body. Both were escorted into the courtroom, their faces gaunt, their eyes silent. The trial began with the opening statement from District Attorney Maria Vance. Ethan Miller, 11 years old, was murdered on October 2, 1977. The Hartley brothers hid the boy's body for 46 years. Science today will give voice to the departed. On the screen, a photo of Ethan in his green jacket was projected, silencing the room. While Thomas Hartley denied everything, Daniel unexpectedly changed his stance. He agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a lighter sentence. Before the court, Daniel said in a trembling voice, "I tied the boy up. Thomas pulled the trigger. I hid the body. We were both guilty." That confession became the most crucial evidence in the case. Thomas's defense attorney, Edward Laskin, countered, "My client did not commit murder. It's all based on DNA and genealogy, speculation from technology that didn't exist in 1977. No one saw Thomas pull the trigger." But the prosecution rebutted strongly, asserting that this was not conjecture but a chain of precise physical evidence. The prosecution presented 4 key pieces of evidence: DNA, a gray hair from Daniel on the victim's collar, Ethan's blood on the nylon rope recovered from the garage. Ballistics, the .22 bullet matched Thomas's Remington rifle exactly. 1977 Mapleton map, marked with a red X matching the location where the body was found. Daniel's confession, aligned with the timeline and location in the 1977 records. When Lieutenant Karen Price was called to the stand, she recounted the journey of reopening the file. "The old map and the X mark led us to Raystown Creek. Beneath that soil were bones, a bullet, and Ethan's jacket. Everything matched." Her voice was low, each word echoing in the thick air. The defense tried to counter with Thomas's testimony. He claimed Daniel had framed him. "I wasn't there. I sold the Remington back in 1981, but the prosecutor produced a 1978 gun repair receipt, signed by Thomas himself." The courtroom fell silent. After 10 days of arguments, the 12-person jury retired to deliberate. Outside, a light rain fell as dozens of Mapleton residents held white flowers, waiting for the verdict. 3 hours later, as the door opened, the entire room held its breath. Defendant Daniel Hartley, guilty. Defendant Thomas Hartley, guilty. The reading echoed through the room. Daniel closed his eyes, sighing as if unburdening a weight. Thomas bowed his head, his hands trembling slightly. Some people burst into tears. Ethan's father sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face. The judge pronounced the sentence: Daniel Hartley, 25 years in prison, reduced for cooperation. Thomas Hartley, life imprisonment without parole. The ruling silenced the room, leaving only the sound of pen scratching and the hum of recording devices in the background. As police led the 2 defendants out, reporters' flashes blazed densely. One reporter asked, "Miss Price, has justice come too late?" She replied curtly, "Justice arrives when the truth is found, however long it takes." That afternoon, the courthouse closed amid the light rain. On the remaining seats, Robert Miller, Ethan's father, quietly placed a bouquet of white flowers down. He whispered, "You're home now, Ethan." Outside, the rain mingled with the tolling of the courthouse bells. The Mapleton case closed, leaving a clear message: time may bury crimes, but it cannot entomb the truth. April 27, 2024, at the Altoona Federal Courthouse, the Ethan Miller case, 1977, officially concluded. After 46 years of investigation, brothers Daniel and Thomas Hartley, those who had haunted all of Mapleton, were brought before justice. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, police, residents, and the victim's family were all present to witness the end of what was considered Pennsylvania's longest cold case solved by genetic genealogy DNA technology. As the two defendants were led in, the courtroom fell pin-drop silent. Daniel entered first, silver-haired, walking slowly but with calm eyes. Thomas followed, head bowed, his face etched with hardship, not saying a word. They sat side by side, but between them was the gulf of 4 decades of lies and sin. Judge William Carrington opened the verdict with a stern voice. After reviewing all the DNA, ballistics map and confession evidence, the court finds defendants Daniel Hartley and Thomas Hartley guilty of second-degree murder, kidnapping of a minor, and concealment of a body. The court sentences both to life imprisonment without parole. He paused for a moment, looking down at the front row. Justice was delayed for nearly half a century, but today, it has been served. Below, Lieutenant Karen Price, head of the cold case unit, quietly gripped the case file in her hand. She and her team had spent 2 years tracing every detail, from the gray hair to the .22 bullet, to bring the truth to light. Beside her, Robert Miller, Ethan's father, sat with his head bowed, tears falling endlessly. When the judge mentioned 46 years of waiting, he nodded, whispering, "Finally, my son." In the back rows, investigators and forensic experts who had worked the case were present. Beckett, who confirmed the blood and hair samples, murmured, "We kept our promise to the boy." No applause, no cheers, just silence, a heavy but serene silence. After the sentence was pronounced, Daniel raised his head to look at the judge, his voice hoarse. "Ethan's home now." Thomas said nothing, his vacant eyes fixed on the floor. 2 officers escorted them out, the click of handcuffs ringing out dryly, like the final period on half a century of concealment. On the courthouse steps, District Attorney Maria Vance addressed the press. "This is the state's longest cold case solved thanks to genetic genealogy DNA. The combination of science and perseverance has delivered justice for a forgotten child." She thanked the cold case unit and the Harrisburg Forensics Lab, calling them those who don't let the truth sleep. News spread instantly across media channels. The Philadelphia Inquirer, CNN, the New York Times, all ran stories with the headline, "46-year cold case solved, Pennsylvania brothers sentenced to life in 1977, boy's murder." Millions shared the articles, calling it DNA's victory over time. In Mapleton, St. Andrew's Church held a memorial for Ethan. On the altar, the boy's photo in his green jacket was placed between 2 white candles. The priest said, "Today, Ethan's soul has been called home." The 46-year silence finally has an answer. The whole town paused for half a day to remember. Children of the new generation heard the story of the boy who was once forgotten, as a reminder that justice may be slow, but it never fails. In Harrisburg, Lieutenant Price gave a TV interview. When asked about the moment that moved her most, she said, "It was seeing Ethan's DNA match his father's. That's when I knew the boy was no longer just a name on a file, but a real person waiting to come home." Her answer drew millions of live viewers. At Cold Case Unit headquarters, Ethan's photo was hung on the closed case's wall, with the inscription below, 1977, 2024, justice served. Karen Price added a small sticky note, "No one is forgotten, even after 46 years. Police academies across the state used the case as a model for genetic genealogy investigations. PBS produced a documentary, Raystown Secrets, the 46-year case recounting the journey to justice, from the abandoned bicycle on Pine Hollow Road to the day of sentencing. The film garnered millions of views in its first week. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForEthanMiller spread powerfully, shared over 500,000 times in 24 hours. One user wrote, "46 years is half a lifetime, but for justice, It's just time waiting for the truth to emerge. That evening, Robert Miller returned to his old home in Mapleton. On the table, Ethan's photo sat next to a reconstructed bicycle from an old picture. He opened the window, gazing toward Pine Hollow Hill, where his 11-year-old son once vanished. Moonlight fell on his gentle, peaceful face. He whispered, "You're home now, Ethan. Everyone remembers you." Outside, spring wind blew through the trees, carrying mist from Raystown Creek, the place that once buried secrets, now a symbol of truth. The Ethan Miller case didn't just close an investigation, it opened new faith, that time may fade every trace, but it cannot bury justice. June 2024, nearly 2 months after the Hartley brothers' sentences took effect, Pennsylvania's Cold Case Unit held a press conference summarizing the Ethan Miller case, C-77-104 at Harrisburg headquarters. This was not just a results announcement, but a historic milestone for the state's investigative field, the first time a 46-year-old case was fully solved using genetic genealogy DNA and GPR technology. The conference room blazed with lights. Behind the podium a large board read, "Evidence Never Dies." Lieutenant Karen Price, who led the investigation, held the 220-page report considered a model document for the entire state. She opened, "The Ethan Miller case shows that evidence never dies, if it's preserved properly, and someone is persistent enough to listen." She recounted the file recovery process. Late 2023, the cold case team reviewed the state police evidence storage. Among hundreds of sealed boxes, they found a small one labeled C-77-104, containing the green jacket, nylon rope, gray hair, and .22 bullet. Thanks to 1970s standard preservation protocols, all evidence remained intact. If that box had been lost, justice couldn't have returned, Price said. The report was divided into 3 sections, describing the 3 key technologies that brought the case back to light: genetic genealogy DNA. Forensic experts at Harrisburg used next-generation sequencing, NGS, to extract DNA from the gray hair, then cross-reference civilian genealogy databases. The genetic chain linked to the Hartley family in Altoona, identifying Daniel and Thomas. Price said, "There was no luck in this case, just science and perseverance." Ground-penetrating radar, GPR. As GPR scanned along Raystown Creek's bank, the device detected an anomaly over 1 meter deep. That was where the bones, jacket button, and .22 bullet were found, the final proof. Without GPR, we might have lost another 46 years, engineer Forrester shared. Ballistics matching, the bullet was 3D scanned and compared to the national database. The rifling marks matched exactly the Remington .22 LR registered to Thomas Hartley in 1976, the decisive incriminating evidence. Price displayed a flowchart of the evidence processing chain, from sealing, preservation, to entering DNA data into CODIS and GED match systems. She said, "The Ethan Miller case proves the principle we always believe in: evidence never dies." The press conference drew heavy media attention. One reporter asked, "Is this success just a rare case?" Price replied, "No. After Ethan Miller, we've reopened 11 other cold cases, with 6 already sent for genetic genealogy DNA analysis." Ethan was the first door. Names of the new cases flashed on the screen, files from the 1960s to 1980s. Each, like Ethan's, could be revived from seemingly meaningless evidence. The report's second part honored collective efforts. Beckett handled DNA and blood sample analysis. Davis was the data engineer who spotted the first genealogy match. Forrester operated the GPR, and Price persistently reopened the file. In her thanks she wrote, "Technology helps us see the truth, but faith and justice is what makes us act." After the conference, Price led reporters to the cold case storage room, where hundreds of evidence boxes stood neatly. In the middle shelf, A new brown box was placed, clearly labeled C77-104, Ethan Miller, solved. Beside it, a small handwritten card, closed June 2024, rest in peace. Price paused for a few seconds, her hand resting lightly on the file box. That boy brought justice back not just for himself, but for others too, she said softly. Immediately after, the state prosecutor's office issued an official statement confirming the Ethan Miller case, his Pennsylvania's longest cold case solved, using genetic genealogy DNA and modern ballistics matching. Major papers like the Washington Post and Philadelphia Inquirer ran articles praising it as a symbol of perseverance in criminal investigation. Police academies nationwide added the case to training programs as a prime example of combining technology and traditional investigation. In July 2024, the Cold Case Unit received special federal funding to expand the Justice Recovered Project, retesting unsolved files before 1990. In an internal meeting, Price told the team, "Ethan paved the way for dozens of other victims. We don't close the work, we turn to the next chapter." As the workday ended, Price stayed in her office alone. She opened her computer, accessed the case management system, and entered the final command. Status closed, case C77-104, Ethan Miller solved. The green text appeared, still and resolute. She leaned back in her chair, eyes on Ethan's photo on the desk, the 11-year-old boy in his blue-green jacket, with a gentle smile. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass window, illuminating the Cold Case Unit logo. Time may pass, evidence remains. Price stood, turned off the lights, and closed the door. Down the hallway, the light reflected off a metal plaque, where a new line had just been engraved. C77-104, solved. The storage room door closed with a soft, neat click, like the final breath of a case laid to rest. And in the quiet night of Harrisburg, perhaps Ethan's soul was smiling too, for finally, the truth had found its voice. The story of Ethan Miller reminds us that in today's American life, justice relies not on luck, but on human persistence and systemic discipline. A gray hair on a jacket collar, a blood-stained nylon rope, a 1977 Mapleton map with an X mark near Raystown Creek Bridge. Small details overlooked, for 46 years, were pieced together by Lieutenant Karen Price's Cold Case Unit, using genetic genealogy DNA, GPR, and Remington 22 ballistics matching. First lesson: preservation and information storage are vital. On a personal level, digitize photos, children's dental records, update family DNA samples in legal programs. On a community level, support budgets and laws requiring law enforcement to maintain long-term evidence storage. Second, technology empowers us when paired with ethical caution. Genetic genealogy can crack cases, but support privacy standards and transparency, so justice doesn't become an invasion of privacy. Third, don't ignore anomalies. A green van stopped on Pine Hollow, late-night trips with bags and flashlights. If you see something similar, report to police immediately. Note license plates, times, directions. Don't spread false leads like the fake Philadelphia call, as it derails investigations and wastes resources. Fourth, persistence and interagency coordination from Harrisburg forensics, ballistics units, to on-site GPR teams. That's the linkage model citizens can support by joining Neighborhood Watch, donating to Justice Recovered funds, or simply showing up at court, writing letters to victims' families. Finally, teach children empowering safety skills, not fear. Go in groups, share routes, know trusted adults. Evidence never dies. When we care for both evidence and community well, the truth will eventually find its voice. Thank you for following the story of Ethan Miller to the end. Proof that justice may come late, but never lost. Subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing the journey, exploring other cold cases where the truth still awaits revelation.